Welcome back to Hinduism. In this video, we're going to examine the Puranas, sacred scriptures focusing on the gods and their incarnations, which were important to Bhakti or devotional Hinduism. First, some historical background to the period in which the Puranas were authored. The Gupta Empire ruled large parts of India in the 4th through 6th centuries. The map on the right shows their territory at its furthest extent. They unified many of the Indo-Aryan kingdoms in the north and also at least briefly controlled some of the kingdoms in the south. It was in this period that Bhakti or devotional Hinduism came to develop. The Gupta rulers were patrons of both Hinduism and Buddhism. In ancient times, it was common for kings to support multiple sects as a way of generating merit or blessings for themselves. There were a series of invasions by the Huns in the 5th century, the same group who also invaded the Roman Empire around the same time. These were fought off by the Guptas, but they seem to have led to the decline of the dynasty's power. The Pallava dynasty ruled parts of South India from 275 to 897 CE. This was a Dravidian dynasty, i.e. the language of the rulers and their people was not based on Sanskrit, but was a Dravidian language that belonged to a different language family. They contributed greatly to the art and architecture of all of India. They built lavish Hindu temples, such as the Shore Temple you can see a picture of on the right. The style of architecture of South Indian Hindu temples had a big influence on later Hindu architecture that continues to this day. And dynasties like the Pallavas were influential in creating a distinctly South Indian form of Hinduism. For example, many South Indians have scriptures that are in a language other than Sanskrit. The Veda and other Hindu scriptures such as the Upanishads, the laws of Manu, etc. are all in Sanskrit, but they have versions of Hindu scriptures in Tamil, a Dravidian language, for example, in South India. The Shore Temple is just one of the so-called 7 pagodas, and it's an example of the generosity and lavish scale of the Hindu kings of this period. They would donate vast sums of money to temples, often build the temples themselves, donate land, etc. And the Shore Temple contains many early statues of Shiva, Parvati, Durga, Vishnu, Krishna, and other Hindu gods. An important teaching from the Puranas is called Trimarga, which means 3 paths. We can see this introduced to Hinduism from the Bhagavata Purana. This is a systematic rendering of the earlier concept from the Bhagavad Gita that there are many different ways you can use to get to moksha or spiritual liberation. These different methods are called yogas, spiritual disciplines, in the Bhagavad Gita. There are no set number in the Gita, although it's often interpreted these days through the lens of the later Trimarga doctrine. The 3 main paths to liberation, according to the Bhagavata Purana, are the path of knowledge, which is Jnana Marga, the path of action, which is Karma Marga, and the path of devotion, which is Bhakti Marga. Jnana Marga, or Jnana Marga, which is closer to the classical pronunciation, is the way of self-knowledge, understanding your true nature, for example, through studying philosophical texts. The main texts that are relevant to self-knowledge in Hinduism are the Upanishads and the texts of the later Sankhya and Vedanta schools of Hindu philosophy. The basic concept of the Upanishads is that your true self is not your individual body, or even your ordinary waking consciousness, your individual mind or ego, but rather a cosmic self that is identical or closely connected to the Supreme Being. Karma Marga, the path of action, refers to sacrificial action, such as the yagnas or yajnas in the Veda, where you give offerings, sacrificial offerings to the gods, or the concept from the Bhagavad Gita of performing your dharma or duty without attachment to result. with an attitude of self-sacrifice. The most relevant texts to outlining this path would be the Veda and the Dharma Shastras. The Veda tells you how to do the sacrificial rituals. The Dharma Shastras outline in more detail your dharma based on caste, age, and sex. And then finally there's Bhakti Marga, the path of commitment, devotion, or love to a god or goddess. This is the path outlined in the Puranas. So the Puranas introduce the teaching of the three margas. There are multiple paths of salvation, but the path they favor is bhakti, or faith. This is also a message we get in the Bhagavad Gita, the earlier text, where Krishna apparently favors bhakti yoga, or using faith as your vehicle to salvation. One of the reasons why it's often favored is because it's regarded as more open and accessible to all. Everyone can have the right commitment or participation with the divine, even if they're not in a position to study philosophy, for example. The image on the right is a modern icon of Shiva, one of the most important gods of devotional Hinduism. So all of the gods of devotional Hinduism have an elaborate iconography. We can mention some of the elements in the picture to show that they do all have meaning. You can see on the left is the trident of Shiva. Attached to the trident is a drum symbolizing the cosmic dance, the rhythm of the cosmic cycle of creation, preservation, and destruction, which Shiva is believed to preside over. The trident is his symbol. It goes back to ancient times, to the Indus Valley civilization, who may have worshipped a god similar to Shiva. We see the snake around Shiva's neck. This is a Naga king, or a serpent spirit king, who's a devout follower of Shiva. This particular serpent king was also used by the gods in ancient times to help them churn the ocean of immortality, or the cosmic ocean, into the nectar of immortality, Amrita, that gives the gods eternal life. You can see the pot in the background. This would be a pot to the right that would hold Amrita, the nectar of immortality. The prayer beads that are being worn by Shiva are basically symbolizing his role as a patron of meditation. In this icon of Shiva, he's shown in the cross-legged posture used by yogis and other meditators, and Shiva is regarded as their patron. He's wearing animal skins, and this is something that may suggest the wildness or remoteness of the life of a meditator. Shiva also seems to have been regarded as a lord of wild places and wild beasts. You can notice the short rounded cylinder that's before Shiva. This is called a lingam, which is an abstract symbol of the god. And it's placed upon a flat stone slab, or yoni. You also notice there's a channel at the base of the yoni. Liquid offerings can be poured upon these lingams, and then they would be channeled and pour out the spout at the front. So this is basically part of an icon that's relevant to the worship practices of the god Shiva. So let's talk more about bhakti, or devotional Hinduism. Bhakti can be translated as participation, in the sense of participating actively in this relationship with the divine. It could also be translated as commitment, devotion, love, or faith in God. So this is a new approach to Hinduism that arises. The beginnings of it are probably in the first few centuries BCE, but it really comes into sharper focus in the first millennium CE. So commitment to a personal God, which is characteristic of bhakti, can be contrasted with the early Veda. So you can see that in the Rig Veda and the other Samhita portions of the Veda, where the focus is on correctness of ritual, performing rituals to honor the gods for the sake of success, primarily in this life and a good afterlife. But even though these rituals honor the gods, It's not the main focus of the religion to have a personal relationship to them. You're mainly just performing the rituals and expecting a result. In the Upanishads, there's an impersonal notion of Brahman, or the Supreme Being, that is prominent. So Brahman is contrasted with the Devas, the gods that have name and form, have a particular appearance, like a different sex, a different color, for example, things like that. Whereas Brahman is more of an abstract, transcendent force. In Bhakti, you worship a personal God, someone that does have a name, an image, and so on, but that God is regarded as identical to or a manifestation of Brahman, the Supreme Being. In Bhakti, God is regarded as a savior, that is, as a path to moksha. In the Veda, the main goal was not moksha, but this worldly success or a good afterlife. In the Upanishads, the goal was moksha, but the path was not worshiping a god. It was meditating and practicing renunciation, giving up worldly attachments. And that's not something that has to be a part of the path of bhakti. Bhakti can combine with it meditation and renunciation, but you can also practice bhakti even if you're a householder, living in the world with a job and family and so on. There's a concept in bhakti of an Ishta Devata. This is a cherished or a favored god. Hindus who practice bhakti do worship many gods, but they typically choose one as their particular favorite, the one they're going to be especially devoted to and focused on. And that's the God that's going to be their path to salvation. Another innovation, so to speak, of Bhakti Hinduism compared to the previous forms is a real focus on worshiping images or murtis of gods in temples. So there probably were temples and shrines before the first millennium CE that was a part of Vedic religion. For example, I've read about one archaeological dig near the birthplace of the Buddha in the foothills of the Himalayan mountains, supposed to be in northern India. That was a shrine basically that predated the Buddha, and so that was something though that would not have been as elaborate as the later temples, many of which were built of stone. The earlier shrines are probably smaller, perhaps mainly built of wood, and so they didn't survive as well. And the Vedic religion was really focused on fire altars. So you would construct these often temporary fire altars, start the fire, and then put your offerings to the gods in the fire. And that's a different type of ritual than what we see in these later temples. The temples would house images of the gods, like the one you can see on the right, and you would give offerings to them and not place them in a fire. You would put candles, incense, fruit, or other things before the images of the gods. So the example in the picture is of Durga Puja. Puja means worship, and Durga is the goddess who's being worshipped there. And we can see the probable influence of Mahayana Buddhism on the development of Bhakti or devotional Hinduism. Mahayana Buddhism appears to have originated in India in the first few centuries BCE, and they made use of images of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, of large temples, and of a similar type of ritual offering. The Puranas are poetic Sanskrit texts. They're in verse form, similar to the earlier texts such as the Itihasa or epics and the Veda themselves. They contain elaborate stories about the gods and their avatars, and they are an expression of the Bhakti movement or devotional Hinduism because they advocate intense devotion in a particular god or goddess as a path to moksha. They were written over a long period from about 500 to 1500 CE. And there are many different Puranas, but traditionally 18 of them are regarded as paramount. 6 dedicated to the creator god Brahma, 6 dedicated to Vishnu, who's regarded as the preserver of Dharma or the cosmic order, and 6 dedicated to the god Shiva, who's regarded as the destroyer of ignorance and a patron of meditation, among other things. The manuscript on the right is from an 18th century copy of the Bhagavata Purana. This Purana is mainly dedicated to Vishnu, but in this image you can see all 3 of the gods I just mentioned. They appear on the center and right side of the image. So we see Vishnu in blue in the center. He's riding his mount Garuda, who's an eagle or winged being. To the right of Vishnu is Brahma, the creator god, who's riding his swan. And to the right of Brahma, on the far right, is Shiva, who is riding his mount Nandi, a bull. This is another indication of the relatively standardized form of the iconography of the Hindu gods. Each of them has a typical number of arms and heads, typical objects they carry in each arm, and they have a typical mount or vehicle that they ride. So let's talk more about these three main gods. They're referred to as the Trimurti, which means three images or three icons. Brahma, who you can see on the left in the image, is a creator of the universe. Vishnu, in the center, is the preserver of the Dharma or cosmic order, and Shiva is regarded as the destroyer of ignorance. Now, these three gods arose in devotional Hinduism and developed their own following before they were systematized as the Trimurti. This is believed to have been a later kind of like reconstruction or reinterpretation of their relationship, because the followers of each of these gods typically regard each of them as Brahman, as the supreme being, and in that respect, they could each be said to incorporate the aspects of creation, preservation, and destruction. The Hindu concept of the universe is that it follows a cycle where it is created by the supreme being, then it's preserved by that being's intervention, and ultimately, though, it is destroyed in order to be recreated again later. The destructive aspect of Shiva, or of the Supreme Being, is not regarded as negative. It is regarded as negative only from the perspective of the ego, or the small self, which fears loss, for example, death or other forms of loss. However, the destructive aspect of Shiva, or of just the Supreme Being in general in Hinduism, is regarded as a potentially positive thing, because the only things that are destroyed are not the soul or the true self, but rather just material nature or the non-eternal part of reality. And so loss and destruction can actually be a vehicle for wisdom and salvation if you cease to identify with the ego or the body and become identified with this true eternal self. And there were three main sects of bhakti in ancient times, each one for one of these three gods. Later on, Brahma fell into relative decline as a god you would worship in his own right. He's actually mostly regarded as an aspect of Brahman, or the Supreme Being, who's manifested as a kind of intermediary or middleman to then create the universe. So the two most popular gods today are Vishnu and Shiva. And there's a third sect of Bhakti Hinduism called Shaktas, and they are devotees of Durga, or another goddess. Followers of Vishnu are called Vaishnavas, and followers of Shiva are called Shaivas. So let's talk briefly about Brahma before we move on to the other gods. Brahma is a creator god, but he's not identified with Brahman, or the Supreme Being. So their names are very similar. There's a small difference between them grammatically. Brahma has a long A at the end. It's a masculine ending in Sanskrit. So it implies interpreting the Supreme Being as a particular male god. He has a sex, he has a particular image. Brahman is grammatically neuter, so it's more abstract, more transcendent. It refers to a being that transcends things like male or female sex and transcends any particular image. Brahma is regarded as the creator, but he only creates, you could say, one facet of all of reality, one universe. The term universe in the context of Hinduism is a kind of world system with many different worlds or levels of being where different kinds of creatures live. For example, each universe has heavenly realms where the gods live, a middle realm where the humans and animals live, and lower realms where demons and serpents spirits live, for example. And Brahma creates that, but he doesn't create the entire multiverse, you might say. So there's many different universes, each with its own Brahma, and each with its own different levels of reality. Brahma is just a manifestation of the Supreme Being, Brahman. Brahman is truly eternal, and he's transcendent. He doesn't necessarily manifest directly in the universe. He creates Brahma to then create one universe. But Brahman is actually manifesting multiple Brahmas and multiple universes all at the same time. So you can get the sense of just the sheer vastness of the creation of the Supreme Being, and also the sense that Brahman is remote, transcendent, and maybe mysterious unless you've discovered the true nature of reality. As mentioned, Brahma is today rarely worshipped on his own. He's typically regarded as a manifestation of Vishnu, or whichever god is regarded as supreme, who then creates the world as a kind of middleman for the sake of the Supreme Being. Let's talk about the distinction between Brahman, or the ultimate Supreme Being in Hinduism, you could call that God, and the other devas, or lesser gods. Brahman is described in the Upanishads as a kind of transcendent being. One phrase that's used is neti neti, which can be translated as not this or not that. The meaning of this is that Brahman transcends all particular perceptible forms. You can't say that Brahman is male, you can't say that he's female. You can't say that Brahman is short, you can't say that he is tall. You can't say that Brahman is black, you can't say that Brahman is white. And I use the masculine article he to refer to Brahman, but you could also call Brahman it. Brahman is impersonal. Brahman, though, is conscious, is an aware being. That's one of Brahman's main actual characteristics, which can be summarized as Sat, Chit, Ananda, or Satya, truth, reality, being, Chitta, consciousness, awareness, and Ananda, bliss. So these are you might call the formless properties of Brahman. They cannot be perceived with the senses or even fully described verbally or rationally, but they can be experienced with your own pure awareness or pure consciousness. So this is the reality that Brahman inhabits: pure being, pure awareness, and complete bliss without suffering or lack. There's also a distinction in Hinduism between Nirguna and Saguna Brahman. Nirguna means Brahman without characteristics. A guna is a characteristic or property that you can observe with the senses, either directly or indirectly. So this is really the original concept of Brahman from the Upanishads as this more abstract, transcendent being. Saguna Brahman is what we see in the Puranas and in devotional Hinduism more. Brahman as a personal god with a particular form or shape. For example, Vishnu, Shiva, or Devi, a goddess. You can contrast Brahman with the other devas. The devas, unlike Nirguna Brahman, which is the transcendent aspect of Brahman, they do have perceptible forms, and they have stories and relationships with each other. So they can be husband and wife, they can be parent and child, etc. So how can we understand the relationship between the Supreme Being Brahman and other gods in Hinduism? Hindus are polytheistic. They do worship many gods, but they also regard one god, Brahman, as supreme. So there's two common ways you see that Hindus use to explain the relationship between the devas and Brahman. One is that the devas are actually all different parts, aspects, or manifestations of Brahman. This can be compared to a certain extent to the Christian doctrine of the Trinity, which is that there's one being, God, but he manifests, you might say, in three different ways, or there are just three different persons in the one being of God. This is similar to the notion in Hinduism that these different devas could be like different faces or different manifestations of Brahman. Brahman chooses to appear in multiple forms in the world for his own cosmic purpose. Another way, though, of understanding the relation between the devas and Brahman is that one of the devas, Shiva, Vishnu, or a goddess, is Brahman, and the others are just creations of Brahman, like lesser gods. This is similar to the Christian or Muslim idea or Jewish idea that there's one supreme being, who they call God, but there's also other eternal heavenly spirits, the angels. And traditionally, at least historically, in the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the angels were often conceived of as governing over different parts of the universe. And this was often connected to the belief that the archangels were associated with the planets the sun, moon, and the 5 visible planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, and that the motions of these planetary objects could affect what happens on Earth. Regardless of that, there's that notion of the angels influencing or having some kind of authority over different parts of the creation. And that's similar to this idea in Hinduism that Brahman creates the universe as a whole, but then he creates these other devas or gods below him that can then have authority over different aspects of the universe. So let's talk about the main sects of Bhakti Hinduism. Let's begin with the Vaishnavas. Vishnu is regarded as a preserver and protector of the Dharma or the cosmic order. He's often conceived of as being a mild, tender, or merciful God, and as being very generous with his support and affection. This is in contrast with Shiva, who can sometimes have a more threatening or aggressive aspect. One of the titles of Vishnu is the all-pervading one. This is a reference to the story of him taking the 3 steps, where he steps across the entire universe in order to win back the cosmos from the evil demon king Bali. So this 3 steps of Vishnu story is one of the early devotional stories we get of Vishnu. Vishnu is named in the Veda, but he's not really a central figure until we get to the period of devotional Hinduism. You can see in the image of Vishnu on the right typical iconography. He's often depicted with blue or black skin. Many times Hindu gods are depicted as standing on a lotus flower. This is a symbol of spiritual purity because lotus flowers have their roots in the mud or darkness of a river or other body of water, but they flower on the surface. And so even if their roots are somewhat murky or dirty, their top, their flower is clean and pure. So this can be a symbol of purity or of moksha, liberation. You can see Vishnu is holding a giant war club. That's kind of a symbol of his power and authority. He's also holding a small wheel that's a chakra, which can be also was a weapon in war in ancient India. The conch shell would be used as a trumpet in warfare, and he's also holding a lotus flower, which is a symbol of purity or enlightenment. Now, the ocean that he's standing on is often used to represent the cosmic ocean early in the history of the universe that was churned by the gods to create the nectar of immortality. So that ocean can itself be a symbol of the kind of immortality and bliss of moksha or liberation. It's very common for the Hindu gods to have multiple arms or heads. So I'm not sure about the exact historical origin of this trend. I don't know if we have the full story of that, but you can see it emerge in Indian iconography in the first few centuries BCE. And the basic interpretation of this is that the gods may have multiple arms or multiple heads to express their great power and their ability and willingness to manifest in multiple places or multiple ways at once. You can see this also, for example, in Mahayana Buddhist iconography, where the helpful bodhisattvas may have hundreds or thousands of arms so that they can help many people in many different ways at the same time. That seems to be the same concept as in Hinduism with the iconography. So Vishnu is regarded as having many different avatars. An avatar is an incarnation of a god where they choose to manifest in a human or animal form to help out humans or preserve the Dharma typically. And this is similar to the Christian idea of God incarnating as Jesus. Of course, a big difference is that in Christianity, there's only one God who does this, and there's only one unique incarnation. That's Jesus. Whereas in Hinduism, there are multiple gods who can take on avatars, and each god can have multiple avatars, not just one. So there's a traditional list of 10 avatars of Vishnu. Actually, there's differences in the details depending upon which list you look at, but each of these avatars has a different shape or form. For example, Matsya is a fish, Kurma is a turtle, Varaha is a boar, and so on. Now, each of these avatars has a story. There isn't time to give all of the details of the stories, but I'll give the rough outline of each. Matsya was a fish who helped rescue Manu from the flood. Manu was an ancient seer, kind of a divine-like sage, who's regarded as the author of the Hindu scriptures on Dharma. He's kind of a Noah-like figure in that he survived this early great flood or cosmic flood. And Vishnu appeared in order to save him from that. And he was a fish, that way he could swim in this flooding water. Kurma was a turtle, and this is connected to the story of the gods who were actually cooperating with the Asuras, or demons, to churn the cosmic ocean in order to create the nectar of immortality, which gives the gods their immortality and their strength when they drink it. The original ocean was just chaotic and formless, and they realized if they churned it, they could turn it into something that could be, consumed like milk or butter. And so, because the ocean was so big, they had to use a mountain to churn it. And they used that snake that wraps itself around Shiva to grab hold of the mountain. You can see it's kind of coiled around it, and there's two teams of gods on the left and Asuras on the right, and they are pulling at that snake in order to twist the mountain and churn the ocean. Well, as they were doing this, the mountain started slipping, and they were going to lose control of it. So Vishnu decided to help out by incarnating as a turtle who could swim down beneath the surface of the sea, prop itself at the bottom of that mountain, and keep it propped up while they were churning. The third incarnation of Vishnu is Varaha, who is a boar, and he manifested in this way so he could save the earth goddess Bu from an evil demon, Hiranyaksha. In addition to the word Asura being used to refer to a demonic being in Hinduism, the word Yaksha can be used to refer to a type of evil spirit or demon. And you can notice the theme. Each of these stories, Vishnu is incarnating to save the day, to save the gods, or to save humanity. The fourth incarnation is Narasimha. This is a half lion, half human, who was incarnating to protect some followers of Vishnu and to kill the demon Hiranyakashipu. Now, this demon had all these special powers. He could not be killed by a human or animal. He could not be killed by a ranged or a melee weapon, hand-to-hand weapon. He could not be killed at day or at night, etc., etc. So Vishnu strategically incarnated in a particular form and killed him in a particular way to bypass all these defenses. For example, the half-lion, half-human form was to get around the notion that Hiranyakashipu could be killed neither by a human nor by an animal. Well, Vishnu was both, or half, so he got around that. He also attacked Hiranyakashipu between night and day at dusk, so we could get around that requirement. Hiranyakashipu could not be attacked either inside or outside of a building, so Narasimha attacked him at the threshold, and he attacked him with his claws and bite, right? So it was neither a hand-to-hand or a ranged weapon, etc. You get the idea. So the fifth incarnation of Vishnu was Vamana, and this is a story I referred to in an earlier video, but the evil king Mahabali was an Asura who had basically tricked the gods or won a victory against the gods, gotten the universe for themselves. Vishnu incarnates as this short Brahmin in order to get a gift from the king. And the gift is he's going to take 3 steps, and that land will be his. The king agrees to this because he's very short and figures he can't step far. Vishnu manifests as a transcendent cosmic being who fills all the heaven. His first step takes him down to the surface of the earth. His second step takes him down across the whole earth. And his third step he places on the head of Mahabali to symbolize his dominance and thus winning back the universe for the gods. You can see with all these stories, they're very colorful, they're very memorable, and that's part of the reason for the popularity of bhakti or devotional Hinduism. It can appeal to people's imagination, it can get them feeling that they can really relate to the gods. The sixth incarnation is Parashurama, who was a great warrior, very strong, who basically conquered the entire world. You'll notice on the icon on the right, there's no image of Parashurama. Instead, this icon appears to have 2 depictions of the god Krishna, as well as showing a version of Vishnu in the center that looks an awful lot like the way Krishna is usually depicted. And that's probably because this was created by a devotee of Krishna. The 7th incarnation of Vishnu is Rama, who is the hero of the epic Ramayana that we talked about in a previous video. Now, Krishna and Rama are probably the 2 most famous and widely worshipped avatars of Vishnu. Krishna appears in the Bhagavad Gita from the epic Mahabharata as a charioteer of the hero Arjuna, but he also has many other stories and texts dedicated to him. In fact, some Hindus worship Krishna in his own right as Brahman, as opposed to merely a manifestation or avatar of Vishnu. Now, some Puranas depict the Buddhist founder, the Buddha, as actually an avatar of Buddhism. This is something that Buddhists would disagree with. They don't regard the Buddha as just an incarnation of the god Vishnu, but this is one way that some Buddhists some Hindus could worship or honor the Buddha and still regard themselves as Hindus or followers of Vishnu. And the typical story told is that the Buddha was an incarnation of Vishnu who taught that you should not kill animals. And this was a way of reforming the Vedic religion to get rid of animal sacrifice, because sacrificing cows or some other animals had been a part of the original Vedic religion, but it no longer is. And this doesn't quite match what you see the Buddha teaching in Buddhism. He doesn't say to go ahead and keep performing the Vedic rituals, just don't kill animals. But that's kind of how it's interpreted from the Vaishnava or Hindu perspective. And the last avatar of Vishnu, Kalki, hasn't happened yet. This is going to be the next avatar where Vishnu incarnates to basically save us from our sin and all the evil of the current age, which is called the Kali Yuga. So once Vishnu manifests as Kalki, he'll be riding a white horse. You can see it there in the picture on the lower right. And he will basically restore the Dharma, but also bring an end to the current age with its increasing evil. So associated with the god Vishnu are several other goddesses and gods. So with regards to goddesses, we see Lakshmi. She's the goddess of wealth and prosperity. She can be worshipped in her own right, but she's also regarded as the wife or consort of Vishnu. There's a notion in Hinduism that God has a male and a female aspect. So you can kind of connect this to the belief of Brahman, the supreme being, as transcending sex or gender. You could think of it as there's both male and female manifestations or aspects of Brahman. And a god like Vishnu will often be paired with a consort like Lakshmi, and they can be worshipped together as the male and female aspects. And there's even a notion of a kind of different characteristic to male and female divine energy. So male divine energy is more transcendent and remote. Female divine energy is often regarded as more grounded and more manifest in the world. The image on the right shows Vishnu reclining on a large serpent with Lakshmi giving him a foot massage, basically showing this concept of a wife serving her husband. You'll also notice that there's a peculiar thing emanating from Vishnu's stomach or navel. This is a lotus flower with a four-headed Brahma, the god of creation, coming out of it. So this symbolizes the Vaishnava idea that Brahma, the creator god, is really just a manifestation, an outgrowth, if you will, of Vishnu. And Vishnu is supreme. Vishnu creates Brahma, and then Brahma creates a single individual universe. Now, who is this serpent upon which Vishnu is reclining? There are different ways of depicting this snake-like being, but it is Shesha, a king of the Nagas or serpent spirits. These serpent spirits are often associated with the earth, nature. Possibly originally they were fertility spirits. They are often regarded as evil or living in an underworld realm in Hinduism. However, unlike the serpent symbol in Christianity, where it's almost universally associated with the devil and evil, the serpent doesn't always refer to evil in Hinduism. In fact, it seems even more commonly used to represent a naga or serpent who's a faithful devotee or worshiper of God. And that's exactly what Shesha is. He's a follower of Vishnu. He is protective of Vishnu. He might be hovering over him. In this case, he's literally supporting Vishnu with his body so Vishnu can recline. It's a kind of illustration of the attitude of devotion and self-sacrifice that a bhakti devotee should have towards Vishnu or God. One of the most widely worshipped incarnations of Vishnu is Krishna. Krishna is a god of cows, goats, flocks, and herders. And the worship of Krishna may have been the origin of the notion in Hinduism that cows are sacred and should never be harmed. Certainly cows have always been important for Vedic religion. Going back to the earlier Veda, they're praised as sources of nourishment. but there are rituals for sacrificing them in the early Veda. So it's possible we can look to the worship of Krishna as an origin for the notion that cows are so sacred you should never harm them. The Bhagavata Purana is one of the important texts for worship of Krishna. This portrays Vishnu in a more kind of remote, cosmic, transcendental light. Even though Vishnu is himself a personal god, Vishnu is basically the Brahman that creates all of these millions of worlds or universes. And because Vishnu is so remote and transcendent, the Bhagavata Purana says that it's easier to worship Vishnu in the form of Krishna. Krishna has a human form, it's a human incarnation of Vishnu, so he's more relatable. So you can kind of see this idea in several of the common depictions of Krishna and Krishna iconography. There's four principal ones showing Krishna as an infant, as a toddler who's sort of mischievous. He's stealing his mother's sweet creamy butter in order to snack on it, and she doesn't want him to, but she is kind of still delighted with how cute he is. You can see this depicted on the right. And also as a young man, he's regarded as very attractive. And so the gopis, or female goat herds, become really romantically obsessed with him. He's kind of like their idol. And their romantic love is kind of standing in for, or a symbol for, the intensity of the love a person's supposed to have for Krishna or God. So the romantic or sexual aspect is probably being used as a kind of metaphor, right? That like just as the intoxication of romantic love seems all-consuming, that's how intense your love for God should be. But with all of these different versions of Krishna, he's still very human and relatable. The last is the wise king and counselor that we see in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is giving this divine advice to Arjuna. And so this would be him as an older adult man. The second main type of Bhakti Hinduism is Shaivism. Shaivas regard Shiva as Brahman, or the supreme being. So Shiva is called a destroyer in the sense that he destroys ignorance and illusion, or Maya. Hindus in general believe that Maya, or illusion, is what keeps souls trapped in samsara, because they're falsely identified with material things or with non-eternal things, and so they just keep on reincarnating in different bodies and forms, but each of those incarnations involves death, loss, suffering, and so on. So even though Shiva has this destructive aspect, which you can see symbolized in the icon on the right by the ring of fire which surrounds him, this destructive aspect is regarded as positive. It's a destruction of illusion and ignorance that keeps you trapped. So this way you can become free and basically become united with Shiva, or God. And one of the aspects of Shiva is as a patron of yoga and meditation. Yoga, in its original or primary meaning, referred especially to meditation, but it can refer to any type of spiritual discipline or practice. So many yogis and renunciates are devoted to the god Shiva. They can combine that life of renunciation and meditation with the bhakti path of devotion to a personal god. Shiva was not a god named in the Veda, unlike Vishnu, but he's associated or regarded as identical to the god Rudra, the god of wind and storms, who is named in the Veda. And this shows you a possible mechanism by which non-Vedic gods can be incorporated into Vedic religion. Shiva Nataraja is Shiva as Lord of the dance. Raja means king or lord, and Nata is dance. And this represents the metaphor of the dance as a cosmic cycle. So just as a dance is governed by a rhythm, there's a rhythm or pattern to the history of the universe, where it's created, it's preserved by Shiva or another god, and eventually it's destroyed, only to be reborn again. And you can see in the image on the right, Shiva looks like he's in the middle of a dance step. So one leg is placed on the ground, the other is raised. Each of the aspects of this icon are symbolic, they have meaning. So you can notice he's actually not standing on the floor, he's standing on a little dwarf type being. And this is actually a representation, a demon who's a symbol of ignorance and delusion. The raised leg is a symbol of enlightenment or moksha. So he's trampling on ignorance and raising towards enlightenment. And each of the arms also has a meaning. One of them holds a hand drum. One of them is gesturing towards the viewer with palm face forward. And that's a symbol in Indian religions that means protection or fear no evil. Another hand is gesturing down towards the raised leg of liberation. And the final hand, which is on our right, holds a flame. And that is the symbol of destruction, but also the heat and fire symbol in Hinduism can refer specifically to tapas or renunciation. So this is burning away impurities in your soul by practicing meditation or by practicing renunciation, like giving up all your wealth, exposing your body to the elements, not wearing clothing or wearing little clothing, not cutting your hair or beard, things like that. Things that may come at some cost to your ego, but can help you find salvation. Just as Vishnu has his consort Lakshmi, Shiva's consort is Parvati, the goddess of love, fertility, devotion, and tender nourishing. Shiva is also sometimes paired with other Shaktis or goddesses, such as Kali. Kali is a god of Tantric Hinduism. We'll talk more about Tantra in a later video. Shiva and Shakti in particular, though, are often regarded as two parts of the divine whole. So it's even more common to see Shiva paired with Parvati or another goddess. And that's a kind of core concept of Shaivism, is the male and female aspects of God. You can see in the icon on the right, Parvati and Shiva gazing lovingly at each other. We can see the characteristic iconography of Shiva, the trident, for example, as well as the serpent around his head protecting him. You also notice Shiva is wearing a necklace of heads. This is a kind of tantric influenced imagery. We will talk a bit more about it in the video on Tantra, but those are demon heads. And there's a kind of destructive or aggressive aspect of the gods in Tantra, where they're often portrayed in a kind of frightening way as bloodthirsty warriors. But what they're destroying is not life or goodness, they're destroying evil and ignorance. And Shiva is even more closely associated with that destructive, frightening, or tantric aspect than a god like Vishnu is, who's typically regarded as more mild. Ganesha is the elephant-headed god. He's the son of Shiva and Parvati and regarded as the remover of obstacles. There's different stories about why he has an elephant head. A famous one is that he was given birth to by Parvati, and Parvati really wanted to keep her son secret from Shiva. She was a little jealous of Shiva. Shiva has all of these followers, all of these people and other beings devoted just to him. She didn't have a devotee. So she made Ganesha kind of like her little worshiper or her little servant. One day when she was bathing, she asked Ganesha to keep watch outside of the bathing chamber or her house so that no one would disturb her. Well, Shiva came home and saw this person he didn't know and just chopped off his head. And later when he encountered Parvati, he told her what had happened and she was horrified. So Shiva, realizing it was actually his son, who he had just never been introduced to, miraculously restored Ganesha's head, but he replaced it with an elephant. Now, it's a somewhat strange story, right? Because why didn't he just replace the original head or another human head? Why an elephant specifically? It still doesn't exactly explain the elephant connection. That's not at all unusual to the story of Ganesha. It's very common with religious stories for them to be created like after the fact to explain some imagery or to explain some ritual or some festival. But it is interesting to note that the god having an elephant head is not common enough in Hinduism that it would just be accepted without explanation. There's usually some specific explanation for why a god has an animal or part animal shape. The third main type of devotional Hindu is a Shakta, who's a devotee of a goddess. Shakti means female divine energy or a goddess, and this is thought of as being more active and manifest in the world than the male divine energy, which is regarded as more transcendent or remote. Shaktas often worship the goddess Durga, who you can see on the right, but other goddesses, including Tantra goddesses like Kali and the Matrikas or mother goddesses, are also common. Durga is a manifestation of the divine energy of creation. She is quite aggressive. She's a slayer of demons, destroyer of evil. You can see in the image on the right her most famous battle against the buffalo demon Mahishasura. And you'll notice she has 8 arms, each of which is holding a weapon or a part of a weapon in the case of the bow. She's also riding a tiger. The tiger is her mount, but also her symbol. You know, she's very aggressive and ferocious. It's just that she directs her aggression towards fighting evil. And a bit more about the goddesses. We talked previously about the Trimurti, which are the 3 main gods of Hinduism. There's also the Tridevi, or the 3 main goddesses. These are the wives or consorts of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and they are Sarasvati, Lakshmi, and Parvati, respectively. We've talked about all these goddesses before, Sarasvati in a previous video. Sarasvati is the goddess of knowledge, learning, the arts, and wisdom. She's the one who's very popular among the goddesses that are prominent in the early Veda. The goddess of the dawn is not worshipped so much anymore, but she still is, probably because of her connection to music and the arts. So she's actually more prominent than worship of Brahma, her husband. Lakshmi and Parvati are also widely worshipped, especially in their connection to Vishnu and Shiva, respectively. So let's talk about Hindu cosmology. The earlier cosmology of the Veda that we covered in a previous video was pretty simple. There were 3 main layers of reality. The heavens, or the upper sky, you could say, that corresponds to outer space today, with the moving stars, planets, and other heavenly bodies. The middle world includes the air and the surface of the earth in Vedic cosmology, and everything else is the earth or underworld, including the land of the dead. This is the basic framework upon which later Hindu cosmology builds, but there's basically a division of the upper and lower realms into many subworlds or subrealms. So typically there are 7 upper worlds that are a part of heaven or Svarga, and there's different types of gods or devas and Gandharvas or other celestial beings that live on those different worlds. The Gandharvas are heavenly musicians, and they're often regarded as patrons of music and the arts in Hinduism. The middle world includes lots of different types of human and animal beings, basically everything that we're familiar with on the surface of the earth. The lower worlds are the home of the Asuras or demons and the Nagas or snake spirits. And there's often 7 realms of those too. Patala can be a generic name for the underworld or one of those lower realms. Typically they're each named. You can see in the picture on the right a depiction of the 7 lower realms. They're depicted as, different parts of this body of this cosmic being. And you can notice the snakes in those pictures are the Nagas who live in some of the lower realms. And another aspect of Hindu cosmology is Mount Meru, a cosmic mountain that's believed to be at the center of the universe. So its roots are in the middle world and it extends up to all of the heavens or upper worlds. Mount Meru is also something believed in Buddhist cosmology. So there is overlap or mutual influence between these different religions. And this is all just one universe or one world system. Brahman actually creates an infinite number of these universes, each with its 15 or more worlds. And each of these individual universes has its own particular Brahma or creator and its own devas. So you can really get a sense of the vastness and elaborate nature of Hindu cosmology. In addition to spelling out a more detailed cosmology, the Puranas and some other texts from the same period or before the Dharma Shastras spell out a detailed cosmic cycle. So the Hindu view of the universe is that it doesn't have a unique creation and end. There is a cycle of creation, preservation, destruction, and recreation. And every universe that exists, the countless ones, each go through this cycle. The cycle lasts for a very long time. So each instance of this cosmic cycle has one Brahma or creator god who creates the universe, and he lives for 100 years. But these are Brahma years or years of Brahma. Each Brahma year lasts 311,040,000 million earthly years. So it's a kind of incomprehensibly vast scale. And this cosmic cycle has a fractal property. So it's a cosmic cycle divided into smaller cycles, divided into smaller cycles, etc. 1 year of Brahma equals 360 days of Brahma plus 360 equally long nights of Brahma. 1 day of Brahma is called a kalpa, and it equals 14 Manvantaras, or 4,294,080,000 earthly years. So 1 Manvantara is getting a bit closer to what we think of as normal Earth scale, but still pretty remote. 1 Manvantara equals 306,720,000 earthly years, and that is divided into 71 Mahayugas. So Mahayuga is the smallest cycle, and it's the scale that's closer to what we ordinarily think of as humans. So let's look at the Mahayuga, or Great Age, Great Eon, in more detail. This equals 4,320,000 years, so still a long time. There's a notion of a cosmic cycle within an individual Mahayuga that consists of 4 main ages: Kurta, Treta, Dvapara, and Kali Yuga. The Kurta Yuga is its name means 4th age, but that's only because it's the 4th distant one from us. And it lasts the longest, 1,728,000 years. The Kurta Yuga is a golden age in which people just follow their dharma or duty spontaneously and naturally. They don't even have to be taught. And there's a gradual moral decline as you go through the cycle. The Treta Yuga lasts for 1,296,000 years, and people do follow their dharma perfectly, but they have to be taught it. They don't do it naturally or spontaneously. The Dvapara Yuga, you could metaphorically call the Treta Yuga Silver Age and Dvapara Yuga the Bronze Age. So there's a kind of gradual debasing or declining. That's what the metal metaphor suggests. The Dvapara Yuga is shorter. It lasts for 864,000 years, and people are no longer uniformly moral. They lose their ability to be perfectly altruistic or deny themselves or ego. And then the 4th Yuga or age is the Kali Yuga. This is actually pronounced differently. It's not the same as the goddess Kali, so it has a different unrelated meaning. It lasts for 432,000 years, and in this age, selfishness, ignorance, violence, bad karma all become more rampant. And it ends with the kind of destruction of the world where it's reabsorbed into Vishnu or another supreme being, whoever is Brahman, and Vishnu then recreates the Mahayuga cycle. And remember, this is just one tiny cycle within the much larger cosmic cycle. So hopefully this gives you some sense of the vastness of space and time in the traditional Hindu cosmology, which is a point of contrast between that and the more limited and linear view of time you see in Abrahamic religions like Christianity and Judaism and Islam.